Welcome, everyone. I'm Michele Cobb, publisher of AudioFile magazine, the number one source for audiobook reviews in the world. And I'm super excited for today's conversation because we're going to be talking to Marshall Karp and January LaVoy. So, Marshall is the author of over a dozen crime fiction novels, including the NYPD Red series, co written with James Patterson. And January, you've probably heard her, is an award winning narrator who has voiced books by Nora Roberts, Dean Koontz, and John Grisham, just to name a few, very few of all the major ones she's done. I have to say, I am listening to this title, Don't Tell Me How to Die, and it has really grabbed me. So, for all the people who are listening to this podcast, I highly recommend you run out and listen to the audiobook after you listen to this podcast because it's quite good. But, Marshall, what I would love for you to start us off with is telling us just a little quick synopsis of enticing our listeners. And it's a mystery, so don't give too much away.
It's a mystery, but as I read all the early reviews, everyone's pointing out what was in my head as I was writing it. It's a family drama about life and love and loss and marriage and family. And it says thriller on the outside of the book. And some people go, where's the thriller? Well, you just have to trust the process. And I'm reading, and bam, whiplash. It suddenly goes into high gear from all this emotional stuff where you are both laughing and crying at the same time as you're reading what Maggie is going through. And of course, nobody can do that better than January LaVoy. And all of a sudden, it just takes on a life of its own, and they're twist and twist and twist, and they all come together and basically explode in certainly the best ending I've ever written, all the way down to the last 5 words. So it is a thriller, but the essence of it is you have this absolutely wonderful woman, Maggie Dunn. She's 43 years old, top of her game, married to a terrific, successful doctor, two great teenage kids. She's been a successful attorney. She's now mayor of her small town. Whole future ahead of her, and she's diagnosed with the same terminal blood disease that killed her mother in her early 40s. And there's nothing she can do. She has an option, chemo, but she watched what happened to her mother. Her mother wasted those last few months. Something else happened when her mother died. Though the predators, the gold diggers, pounced on her suddenly single father. The book was early on called Women with Casseroles. They do come, and not all of them are well intentioned. And as a teenager, Maggie's mother said, please, just keep an eye out for these people. And Maggie and her sister did their best, but to no avail. And somebody came along and absolutely destroyed their family. Maggie's the kind of person who says, that's not going to happen to my family. I have 3 months to live, and I am going to spend these last remaining days I have on earth finding the next wife for my husband, the next mother for my kids. And somewhere along the line, I mentioned that, did you happen to know that when she was in high school, Maggie was voted most likely to kill someone to get what she wants? I am in awe of the reader response about how this is a slow burn. A lot of people said, I would have read it even if it didn't kick into a mystery. I hate shameless self promotion, but this is such a good book.
It really is. I do have to agree with you. And that was a great little synopsis. Again, there's so many things I want to say, but I would be giving away plot, which I hate to do. So, January, without giving anything away, can you tell us, is there anything in particular you took away from narrating this particular title?
Well, first of all, I get to do this because this is not shameless self-promotion. This is shameless Marshall promotion. The book is amazing and everyone should read it. And I would say that one of the things that I learned, and this is really true, I'm up there now around like 6 or 7 or 800 titles that I've narrated. And so it's, more than a few. And I do a fair number of, thriller, mystery, suspense, and it is still possible for an author to knock my socks off, is what I learned. And I will tell you a really quick story because I told Marshall this. I work with an engineer and we've done hundreds of books together, and he's a man of few words. His name is John. He's a wonderful guy, wonderful engineer. And we got to the end of, I said the last 5 or 6 words that it is at the end of the book, and there was this moment of silence, and then he went, "That was awesome." It really is true. It's a very, very special book.
So now, Marshall, you're a writer, but you actually grew up reading books. So I'm curious, how do you feel about audiobooks?
I'm so glad you asked that question because I prepped all night with an answer. Yeah, I think so many people think that audio books are a new concept that came out of technology. But think back. I had an audio narrator. All of us, it doesn't matter how old you are, you grew up listening to books. Daddy, read me the next one. Mom, read me that. When my kids were little, if I'd go on a business trip, I would record books for them to listen so I could read to them at night. The difference between audiobooks and books is like the difference between film and radio. It's just audio brings everything to life. I mean, my father had his own special way of creating cowboys or monsters or different voices for the characters, and nobody does it better than January. People said, how does she do that?" I said, "I don't know. I don't care. I'm thrilled that she was willing to do it for me, and I'm extra thrilled that her engineer, what actually, I know that type, the strong, silent, get it done type, and then all of a sudden, this is awesome." So audiobooks for me, that I grew up reading, but I never gave up listening. And if I can have somebody read a book to me, wait, January read my book to me. There were times when I said, "Oh, this is so much better."
It was great. I wish it could have been a special feature on the audiobook.
I do a lot when I write. I'll read it back out loud all the time. I want to hear if the characters sound real.
Yeah.
Have you ever asked AI a question and it always, Chat GPT answers like Hal from, from 2001. I mean, it's just like robotic. It's not the voice. It's the mechanism of the words. It just, I never ask ChatGPT to write for me. I'll say like things you can't get on Google, like how sophisticated is the New York City Police Department's cameras, street cameras all over compared to London or China, and it knows stuff. But as one writer I spoke to said, writers are not threatened by AI. ChatGPT is like the world's dumbest writer room, where they all are pitching stuff. It's almost all dumb, and then all of a sudden you go, "Oh wait, no, I'm going to follow up on that concept." So, have I belabored the question?
Well, let's see what January has to say because, January, I'm curious. Before you started narrating audiobooks, were you a fan?
In short, no, I was not. I had
Really?
never listened to a grown-up audiobook before I narrated my first one. But this is important. Similarly to Marshall, I was read to constantly as a child, and I learned to read from audiobooks because we didn't call them that at the time, but there were these little, I had this stack of little books. I think they were Disney properties, and then they all had a little 45 album in the sleeve inside. And so if my mom or dad wasn't available to read to me, I would take those out and I knew how to put them on the record player and I would read along. And that's how I learned to read. So my attachment to that mechanism of recorded audio is very, very deep, very primal.
Now, Marshall, as a writer, you're reading aloud. Do you also have the audiobook in mind, especially now after hearing January read them?
I have more than the audiobook in mind. I've
Yeah.
been in the film and television business. I try to think cinematically. I think this book is a natural for an 8-part streaming series. It could be a movie, but I think it's got legs and it would do even better. So I try not to have two people talking together, just talking heads. Where can I put them that will be interesting? What's going on in the room? I might have written chapter 16 3 weeks ago, and now I'm up to chapter 21, and I'm back to the characters from chapter 16. I have to go back and
Mhm.
see it in my head. Oh, wait a minute. That guy got clobbered in chapter 16. I got to remember how he feels because in real time, it's just a few minutes from the punch in the face. So I listen. I want it to come alive in my head. I want it to be theatrical. And January's, well, she's more than just a voice. Just look at her, for God's sakes. She's on stage. She's a performer, and I look for the performance, and I love doing it because it's it's just it's what I do. I can't think any other way, and it's hard to teach people how to do that. But yeah, I want the book to come alive, and there's no other way to do it than to have people perform it.
Now, January, when you read the title, did you have any interactions with Marshall before you got in the booth?
Yeah, we did. It was
Oh,
great because
good.
I had just finished prepping the book and we had a Zoom call. And I mean, it was kind of like, I don't know, what do we call it? Like love at first Zoom? I don't know. It was just like instantaneous. We were both like, "Oh, yes, I get it. I get you." And I think to Marshall's point about him thinking cinematically, his background being in film and television, perhaps one of the reasons that this is such a good fit is because when I coach audiobook narration, I tell people audiobooks are a visual medium. And people look at me like I'm a little bit crazy. And I say, you have to understand it is a visual medium. I know you think that you consume it through your ears, but what you are doing is creating the image through people's ears. But if you don't have the image, they're not going to get it. And so there is a little bit of reframing, I think, that I tend to do, even when a book isn't written that way. But when a book is written that way, my access to it is almost instantaneous. And it was funny because when we had our call, it was sort of like, do you have any questions? And I was like, no, I get it. I really, really get it. And I'm just chomping at the bit to kind of get in there with it because I understand this book. I understand the story. I think I know what it wants. He was very supportive of my, saying, no, I think I got it. I think I know what it is. I'm ready. And he just let me go. And I'm so grateful for that.
So, Marshall, you're clearly involved in the process of choosing a narrator, and so I'm curious, what do you look for?
Well, I mean, it's easier these days than it was back on my first audiobook. I mean, with January, I knew that she had the chops beyond belief to do this, and this was my first person female, and I was like thrilled that she said yes. But then, even beyond that, when we talked on that Zoom call, we got personal enough to know that the story resonated with her on a deeper personal level. It wasn't just another gig. And that was, oh, that meant, I mean, by the way, you had the job without the Zoom, is that, but but that meant a lot. You can tell when you're casting who fits the role, who does it.
So it sounds like your readers respond really well to your audiobooks. I'm curious, what kind of comments do you get?
My best comment ever. Okay,
That's
I was in Miami, and my wife is my biggest fan and my biggest critic. So my first book, I didn't know what I was doing, and I hung around with a lot of cops. So I was dropping f bombs on every page. And when she looked at my second book, she said, page two, F bomb, page. Yeah. So I cut back. So when I went down to Miami, I said to people, I said, look, a cop gets shot. He's not going to say, oh, fudge. You know, cops are a certain way. I have to be authentic. I said, how do you feel about it? And most people understood. And one woman says, I'm fine with it. The only trouble I have down here is I ride in a convertible, and when I'm stopped at a red light and I'm listening to one of your books, and they start, you know, rattling off these, she said, everybody's looking at me like, "Hey, girl," you know. I go like, now I would never think of that, but that is so cool to know, you know, that. Look, one guy wrote to me and said, I don't know why you have to use that language. I will never buy another of your books again. And I said, I so respect your values, but please understand that my values are to be true to the craft and make the characters true to life. They have to behave. I know cops. Yeah, I know doctors. Wherever there's a dark side to the business, surgery, you know, firefight, that's their release valve often. It's not that they're not intelligent. They're plenty intelligent. They just have to like spit something out. I said, so please accept my dedication to my readers to get it authentic. The guy sent me back such a nice email afterwards. It was like a meeting of the minds. Yes, thank you for respect. He thought I'd blow up at him. Don't you know? You know,
Mm.
and it was just absolutely wonderful. So my interaction with my readers, I think people don't believe this, but I don't read most of my reviews. I've gotten God hundreds of thousands of reviews on Amazon. I'm not that comfortable with reading them because I will either believe that I totally suck or that I walk on water, and neither one of them. Now, I have a partner in crime, Danny Corcoran, who's a retired NYPD detective, and he's been working with me for almost 10 years. He's my go to. I bounce everything. I said, Danny, now what happens if? And we become such close friends, and he's so involved with everything I do. He reads them all the time, and he said, you've got to look at this because it's telling you something you should know. One of the new characters I created in NYPD Red 7, they want to see him come back. Okay, that's good to know. So I just want to say to seriously to all the writers out there who are still trying to crack the code, trust yourself. Get get deep down. Write the book you want. Don't write the book you think you can sell. There's a million people who can stop you from becoming a published author. Only one person can stop you from being a writer. And I spent a lot of time trying to pay back what was given to me by encouraging and fostering writers. I mean, there are writers among us that are reluctant to get it out, and then suddenly they're encouraged to open up.
Well, that really leads us nicely into sort of my next question for January, because you talked at the beginning about how this is a thriller with a lot of crying. That is true. That's kind of the emotion that I've had in listening. And January, I'm curious because you have a background in theater and voice acting. How do you bring all of this to find that authenticity?
It's craft, so you get better at it with time, for sure. I mean, there's lots of components. There's talent, there's craft, there's the match of the performer and the material, there's good material, there's all the different things, right? One of the things that I think is really interesting is, I've been living in Atlanta for about 5 years, but right before I left New York, the last play I did in New York was a wonderful show that I got to do with an ensemble cast, and it was tremendous. And an actor friend of mine who is a big Shakespeare guy in New York came to see the show. And afterwards, we went out to get a drink, and he was like, "You're so good." And he was like, "No, you're so good now. Like you're better than you've ever been before." And I was like, "Thank you." And he looked at me and he was like, "Is it the audiobooks?" And I had never thought about, everyone always asks, like, how does your theater background inform what you do in audiobooks? But the fact of the matter, and as soon as he said it, I was like, it absolutely is. I have become a different kind of storyteller because of the rigor of hundreds and hundreds of pages of story and hundreds of characters per year, arcs, psychology, emotion. So there is something to having done both together, and that I ping back and forth. I mean, I was directing a show, I think right before I directed a show in the spring, I did Marshall's book, then I directed another show. And, I'm always sort of coming in and out of both. And I truly think that there's, a symbiotic relationship. And I think of myself now when people ask me what I do, because I do direct and I do narrate and I do act, I'm like, I'm a storyteller in a lot of different capacities, but that is the thing that ties it all together. And so I think that I've just become much more specific and deliberate in terms of always understanding that my job is to support the story in whatever capacity I'm working on a project.
Hey, I want to say that you know the old saying of that Ginger Rogers did everything Fred Astaire did, only she did it backwards and in heels, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, what you said about audiobooks, you are doing everything that a stage actress would do without the ability to move and gesture and eye contact. And it's all in inflection, and that starts to inform you. I think it just rubs off that you become a better actor because
Mm-hmm.
you are working, with one hand tied behind your back. There's no visual. You
Yeah.
are painting the picture,
Yeah. The limitation.
and
Yeah.
that's what I loved when I listen. I go, "Oh my god!" I guess you've been told you have a future in this business.
I'm still trying to break through.
I'm not a kid anymore, but I'm hoping the same for me.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe this will be it for us, our big break together.
Buy a milkshake.
I do want to say one other thing, Michele, because especially the Ginger Rogers comment made me think of this. And Marshall has mentioned that this is your first, sort of female first person narrator. And I will admit, you were a new author to me as well. And so when I got the book and I looked it up and I looked at what you'd done in the past and I started reading and I'm seeing all these female characters and I'm thinking to myself, how's this gonna go? I wonder. You never know. And when I tell you, the women in this book feel so real, so authentic. Their thought processes and emotions and experiences are familiar to me. And there may be folks. I mean, there are lots of folks out there who have very strong opinions about who should tell whose story and who should do what. And as an audiobook narrator, my job is to tell every character in the book. Sometimes they're not even humans, you know. And I have always told people, because people come to me because I'm biracial, I'm a woman, and people always ask me, what do I have permission to narrate? Where should I draw my lines about what and I always say, look, that is an intensely personal decision, but I have always thought that a good rule of thumb is that you should ask yourself, if you're voicing a specific kind of character that is not of your particular identity, do you love someone of that identity? If you do, you will probably be okay voicing that character. Then, if you don't love someone, do you like someone and know someone of that identity? Okay, you're probably going to be okay still. Have you ever met someone of that identity? No? We're getting into some dicey territory here, you know? That to me has to do with our ability as creators and storytellers to lift up and interpret the human condition. It comes from love. And so I don't know much about your life. I know you've been married for a long time, but I know reading this book that you are someone who loves and cares for women. That I just know. So,
Well, thank you. I'm also an author who does research. Spoiler alert, I did not grow up as a teenage girl. Before I started writing the book, I went to 50 women and asked what they would do if they were in Maggie's place. You have months left to live. Your father was pounced on and everything went wrong. What would you do? Not one of them came up with what Maggie would do, which was
Mm,
great because I don't want Maggie, I don't want to write a book about a woman who's the same as all other women, you know?
that's right.
And after I wrote one draft and two, I sent out manuscripts to dozens of women who would come, who would, this is very well informed by women. Apparently, this just in, women don't think about sex the same way men do. So I get the feedback and I keep crafting it, knowing what is, you know, I've created characters, I've created cops, people who work in battered women's shelters. And I appreciate the comment. In fact, I was really concerned that a lot of people would be judgmental and say, a man can't write this book.
Well, we have covered a lot of territory today. So I've two final questions for you, Marshall. We heard before we started recording that January had a very strong response to the end of the book. And so I'm curious, did you know how the story would end before you started writing it?
No, I, well, I don't just sit down and write a book. Look, the character of Maggie Dunn, and those people who write or create understand this. I didn't know the ending, but it had to be spectacular and it couldn't be, oh, the lab reports were wrong. No, it had to be something that absolutely took everyone by surprise. And when that happened, it was the first thing was like, no, you're out of your mind. Don't. And then little by little,
Mm.
Wow.
I saw the possibility. So when I really started to write, not just outline, I knew where I was going.
And then the last question for you. Which of your audiobooks would you recommend listeners start with?
Don't Tell Me How to Die, narrated
Mhm.
by January LaVoy. And when you're finished with that, listen to it again because it is that good. I'm not plugging my other books. I will give you my website, Karp, as in Marshall Karp, Karp, Karp Kills, bang, bang, karpkills.com. And almost all my books have, lots of free chapters.
Well, I appreciate you both talking to us and giving us insights about what I would call an emotional thriller, because I did find it thrilling, but really did have that emotional punch as well. So thank you to Marshall Karp, to January LaVoy, and of course to Blackstone for helping us create this episode. I will encourage everyone to be sure that you visit AudioFile's websites for reviews and sound clips from thousands of audiobooks, including Don't Tell Me How to Die by Marshall Karp, performed by January LaVoy. And please take a moment to rate and review this podcast so that you can help others find us. Thank you both.
Thanks.
Thanks, Michele.
And thanks to our audience for listening.